Imagine waking up tomorrow and your country is gone. The borders on the map? Erased. Your government now answers to a distant emperor, and your religion is chosen by someone hundreds of miles away. 400 years ago, that was just Tuesday in Europe. Then, in 1618 in the city of Prague, two men were thrown out of a castle window. It looked like a small rebellion. Instead, it ignited a war so destructive that 1/3 of Germany died. But here's the strangest part. When the war finally ended, the survivors accidentally created the world we live in today. The reason your country exists, the reason borders matter, the reason governments have sovereignty, might just come from the bloodiest war Europe ever forgot. Before we jump into today's story, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Follow me as we uncover the hidden battles, secrets, and legends of history that textbooks never tell you. Before the war, Europe wasn't a map of nations. It was a map of claims. What we call Germany didn't exist. Instead, Central Europe was a fragmented expanse called the Holy Roman Empire. Despite the grand name, it wasn't holy, Roman, or an empire. It was a political labyrinth. Hundreds of territories, duchies, bishoprics, tiny city-states, each with its own ruler, its own laws. A traveler could ride for a day and pass through 3 jurisdictions, 3 sets of taxes, 3 different loyalties. Above this fractured world stood the Holy Roman Emperor. In theory, he ruled them all. In reality, his authority was fragile, constantly challenged by princes who acted like independent kings. This wasn't a bug in the system, it was a feature. The empire survived for centuries on a delicate balance of compromise, but compromise has limits. Beneath this patchwork, another division was deepening. Since the 1500s, the Protestant Reformation had shattered religious unity. Martin Luther's challenge to the Catholic Church split families, cities, and regions. By 1555, the empire tried to contain the chaos with a simple rule: cuius regio, ius religio. The ruler's faith determined the territory's faith. On paper, it was stability. In reality, it planted a bomb. Religion was no longer just belief, it was power. If a ruler changed faith, his subjects either converted or left. And not all Protestants were even protected. Tensions didn't just simmer, they hardened. Catholic rulers watched the Protestant expansion with dread. Protestant princes feared the Habsburgs, the powerful dynasty holding the imperial crown, were trying to roll back their freedoms. By the early 1600s, 2 armed camps faced each other across the empire: the Protestant Union and the Catholic League. It was a powder keg. All it needed was a spark. The Kingdom of Bohemia was overwhelmingly Protestant. For years, its nobles had guarded their religious freedoms. But now, Catholic officials acting for the Habsburg Emperor were shutting down Protestant churches. To the nobles, this wasn't just policy, it was a warning. So they marched to the castle. They weren't a mob, they were deliberate. They confronted the emperor's representatives, 2 imperial governors. The argument began. Voices rose, accusations flew. The governors refused to back down. In that moment, the argument stopped being political. It became personal. The nobles seized the 2 men. They dragged them to a 70-foot window, and without hesitation, they threw them out. A 3rd man, their secretary, was pushed out after them. For a moment, silence. Then the realization: this wasn't a protest anymore. This was an open rebellion. By all logic, the men should have died. They survived, badly injured, but alive. Catholic accounts called it divine intervention. Protestant accounts offered more earthly explanations. It didn't matter. The act itself had changed everything. Imperial officials thrown out of a window. Authority publicly defenestrated. For the Habsburg Emperor, there was only one response: war. What started as a local crisis was about to pull the entire continent into the abyss. At first it looked containable, a rebellion in Bohemia. The emperor could crush it, but the Bohemian nobles went further. They rejected the emperor and elected a new king, Frederick V, a Protestant prince backed by powerful allies. Suddenly, a revolt became a continental provocation. Emperor Ferdinand II understood the stakes. If Bohemia succeeded, the Habsburg position would collapse. In 1620, imperial forces marched into Bohemia. The battle came at White Mountain. It was over in hours. Frederick's army was crushed. He fled into exile, forever remembered as the Winter King, whose reign lasted barely a season. Order restored. War over. Right? Wrong, because when the emperor imposed a harsh Catholic restoration, seizing lands and redistributing power, he created something new: fear. Protestant princes across the empire watched and saw a warning. If it could happen in Bohemia, it could happen anywhere. So the war didn't end, it widened. Denmark invaded in 1625, hoping to expand its influence. Imperial forces pushed them back. Then in 1630, something far more dangerous arrived. Sweden. Led by King Gustavus Adolphus, one of the greatest commanders of his age, the Swedish army was disciplined, modern, aggressive. Backed by French money, Gustavus tore through imperial territory. For the first time, the emperor looked vulnerable. The war was no longer about Bohemia. It wasn't even just about religion anymore. It had become a struggle for who would shape the future of Europe. By the 1630s, the war had outgrown its origins. But behind the front lines, a new calculation was taking shape. France was a Catholic kingdom. By all logic, they should have backed the emperor. But Cardinal Richelieu, the mastermind behind the French crown, saw a different threat. Not Protestantism, but Habsburg encirclement. The Habsburgs controlled Spain to the south and the empire to the east. If they consolidated power, France would be surrounded. So Richelieu made a decision that redefined the war. A Catholic kingdom began secretly funding the Protestant armies. The contradiction was deliberate, because this was no longer a war of faith. It was about controlling Europe. In 1635, France dropped the pretense. French armies crossed into imperial territory, not as allies of Protestantism, but as rivals of Habsburg power. The transformation was complete. Catholics fought Catholics. Protestants allied with Catholic kings. Old loyalties dissolved. For the people caught in between, the difference didn't matter. Destruction continued, but now it was driven by something far more relentless than belief: state ambition. And wars of belief can end in compromise. Wars for dominance tend to consume everything until there's nothing left. By the mid-1630s, the war had lost any shape. There were no clean fronts, no stable alliances. Armies didn't advance, they drifted. Soldiers lived off the land because there was nothing else. When the land gave out, they burned it. For civilians, the war wasn't distant, it was immediate. A village could wake to silence and be overrun by midday. Doors broken, homes destroyed. Resistance was useless. Across the German lands, the effects piled up. First the armies, then famine. Fields unplanted, trade collapsed, grain prices beyond reach. Then disease, typhus, plague, moving along the same roads as the soldiers. By the 1640s, some regions lost a third of their population. Villages vanished, land returned to wilderness. And yet the war continued, not because victory was near, because stopping had become harder than fighting. No one trusted the others to negotiate honestly. No one believed peace would hold. It had an outgrown strategy. It had become a condition, a state of Europe itself. Generals like Wallenstein built vast private armies, but even they couldn't control what the war had become. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about endurance. Who could survive just one more year? If this story fascinates you, make sure to subscribe and check the playlist. There are more epic battles and hidden histories waiting to be discovered. By the 1640s, the war reached its limit, not in victory, not in defeat, in exhaustion. Every side was spent. The emperor's authority was strained. Sweden's momentum had stalled. France couldn't push to a decisive end. Treasuries were empty. Armies were shrinking, not from defeat, but from desertion, disease, unpaid service. No one was winning, and no one could afford to lose. And yet the war didn't stop, because peace requires trust, and there was none. But then quietly, diplomats began to move. They gathered in two German cities, Münster and Osnabrück. It was unprecedented, not a negotiation between two sides, but a web of them. Dozens of delegations, Catholic and Protestant powers negotiating separately, messengers traveling back and forth. For years, the talks dragged on, while the war continued in the background. Battles were still fought, but something had changed. For the first time, leaders weren't asking how to win, they were asking how to end it. What they were trying to do was not just stop the fighting, they were trying to redesign the rules of Europe so a war like this could never happen again. In 1648, the agreements were finally signed, the Peace of Westphalia. At first glance, it didn't look revolutionary. Territories were exchanged, religious rights clarified. It seemed like the end of a war. But buried in the details was a shift in how power itself was understood. For centuries, authority had overlapped. The emperor claimed supremacy. The pope claimed spiritual authority over all Christendom. Westphalia dismantled that structure. The treaties confirmed that the princes of the Holy Roman Empire had the right to govern with a new level of independence. They could make alliances. They could negotiate with foreign powers. They were no longer just subjects of an empire. They were political actors in their own right. The emperor remained, but his authority was now limited, constrained by agreements he couldn't override. And religion, the original fault line, was reshaped. Calvinism was finally recognized. Rulers could still determine their territory's faith, but minorities were granted defined rights to practice. It wasn't full tolerance, but it was a boundary. And then there was the unspoken principle that each state had authority within its own borders, free from external interference. No emperor imposing policy from above, no pope dictating internal governance, no foreign ruler claiming the right to intervene. It wasn't absolute, but it was new. For the first time, Europe began treating its political units not as fragments of a universal order, but as independent actors. The implications were enormous. By redefining authority, Westphalia created a framework where conflicts would be managed not through religious supremacy, but through diplomacy and balance. States began to operate with a new awareness that survival depended on legitimacy, on recognition, on the acceptance of others. The war had forced Europe to confront a reality it could no longer ignore. No single power could dominate the continent without resistance from the rest. So instead of unity under one authority, Europe would move forward as a system, fragmented, competitive, but structured. It wasn't peaceful, but it was stable enough to last. The war had begun with a question of faith. Who would control belief? Who had the right to decide how others lived? For 30 years, Europe tried to answer that with force, and it failed. Not because one side was weaker, but because no side could impose its will without triggering resistance from everyone else. That was the lesson, and it changed everything. When the treaties took hold, the goal was no longer to unify Europe under one religion or one empire. That idea was broken. In its place, a new reality emerged. A continent made up of states, defined not by universal authority, but by territory, by borders, by rulers who governed within those borders and accepted that others would do the same. Slowly, this changed how power worked. Diplomacy became permanent. Ambassadors became fixtures. War, when it happened, was framed by rules. The idea that a ruler could interfere in another territory on the basis of religion or imperial claim began to lose legitimacy. And that shift created something that hadn't truly existed before: sovereignty. the principle that a political entity governs itself within defined borders without external control. It sounds obvious now, but it wasn't then. Over the next centuries, fragmented regions would consolidate, borders would stabilize. The world we recognize today, of countries, of international law, of diplomacy between equals, did not appear all at once, but it traces back to this moment. This war didn't end with a hero standing on the battlefield, claiming victory for one side or the other. It ended in a pair of German town halls with diplomats who had spent years arguing over words on parchment. And in those words, Europe's old world, the world of universal empires and faith enforced by fire, was quietly dismantled. What replaced it was something unprecedented, a system where states recognized each other's right to exist, where borders meant something, where rulers stopped pretending to rule by divine mandate alone and started governing by treaty, by negotiation, by mutual interest. That system didn't bring peace overnight. Wars would continue for centuries, but the nature of those wars changed. They became contests between sovereign states, not crusades to eliminate the other side entirely. That distinction matters because it allowed something fragile but essential to survive: coexistence. The Holy Roman Empire didn't collapse immediately. It lingered for another century and a half, but its authority was hollowed out. The princes now governed with a freedom they had never formally held. The emperor's word was no longer law across the land. The old hierarchy had given way to a new reality, a Europe of states, not estates. And those states over time became nations. Nations became countries. Countries became the world you know today. So when you look at a map, at the borders drawn, at the governments that answer to their own people, not to a distant emperor, you are looking at the echo of this war. A war that began with two men falling from a window in Prague and ended with the birth of the international system that still governs us. The survivors of that 30-year nightmare didn't set out to create the modern world. They just wanted to stop the killing. They wanted to find a way for different people with different beliefs to share the same land without tearing it apart. In that desperate negotiation, they stumbled on something revolutionary: the idea that peace doesn't require unity. It only requires rules that everyone can live with, even if no one gets everything they want. That's not a heroic origin story. It's not a battle won by a brilliant general. It's the slow, grinding work of exhausted people who decided that survival mattered more than triumph. And maybe that's the real lesson of the 30 Years' War. The world we live in, the borders, the sovereignty, the countries we call home, was not created by design. It was created by survival, by people who had seen too much destruction to keep fighting and too much division to pretend they could ever be one. So they built a system that didn't ask them to be the same. It only asked them to live with each other. And that fragile, flawed, revolutionary idea, born from the ashes of a forgotten war, is still holding the world together today. Thanks for watching. Click subscribe and dive into this playlist next. More untold stories of empires, warriors, and history-changing battles are just a click away.